There is a level of mental fortitude that makes you completely untouchable. And today, you will discover how ancient Japanese warriors developed it over 600 years ago, and exactly how you can start building that same unbreakable mind right now. Have you ever met someone who never complains? Someone who faces rejection without a single flinch? Who handles harsh criticism without immediately jumping to defend themselves? Who walks into any room carrying absolute quiet confidence? While everyone else is busy making excuses, while everyone else crumbles under the slightest weight of pressure, this person stands firm like an old oak tree. And do you know what people usually say? They say, "They're just lucky. They don't have the real-world problems I have." Or, "They were just born different." But what most people refuse to accept is this. There is a brutal price to pay for this kind of strength. Most people take one look at that price tag and turn away. They want the trophy without the scars. However, in feudal Japan, there was a class of warriors called the samurai. They engineered a training system so ruthlessly effective that it forged ordinary men into unbreakable legends. If you have been following this journey, you know how deeply obsessed I am with Japanese warrior philosophy. Today, I am going to strip away the myth and show you their true secret. Not the martial arts techniques they used in physical combat, but the internal operating system they used to forge a mind that fear could not penetrate. Before one of these grandmasters passed away, he left behind their entire blueprint in a single word: Fudoshin, the immovable mind. A mind that cannot be disturbed by any external force. Within this concept lies the exact formula to become someone that nothing on this earth can shake. But there is a massive catch. This method has nothing to do with toxic positivity. It is not about repeating daily affirmations in front of a mirror, nor is it about visualizing your success. It is about exposure. These warriors did not build their mental armor by retreating into safe spaces. They built it by deliberately hunting down the exact things that terrified them the most. Before I show you exactly how this system works, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment sharing the one thing that consistently breaks your composure. It really helps this content reach more people, and I genuinely enjoy reading and interacting with your stories. Now, back to the journey. Our story begins with Aoi, a 28-year-old marketing manager living in a hyper-competitive, bustling city. She was ambitious, intelligent, and an incredibly hard worker. But Aoi carried a psychological tumor that was slowly eating her alive from the inside out. She was fragile, not physically but mentally. Every piece of constructive criticism from her boss felt like a direct, personal assault on her worth. Every difficult conversation left her stomach knotted in pain. Every workplace conflict made her want to evaporate into thin air. At night, she would lie awake for hours, replaying trivial arguments in her head, agonizing over what she should have said, and torturing herself with catastrophic scenarios that would never actually happen. The pattern was always the same. Someone would upset her. This would immediately shatter her emotional equilibrium, and then it would take her days to recover. A single harsh email from a client could ruin her entire week. A passive-aggressive comment from a coworker would loop in her mind like a broken record for days. She was constantly reacting, constantly defending, and constantly exhausted. It wasn't just at the office. In her relationship, Aoi couldn't handle the slightest disagreement. Whenever her boyfriend offered a critique, she would either shut down completely into a cold silence or explode in blinding anger. There was no middle ground. She was either the helpless victim or the aggressive tyrant. She lacked the capacity to simply stay calm and address the issue at hand. Eventually, her friends started walking on eggshells around her, avoiding any heavy topics. "You're just too sensitive," they'd say. "You take everything so personally." And they were right. She did, because she had no emotional armor. Every word penetrated her skin, every minor inconvenience destabilized her world. Then came the day that broke the camel's back. Aoi was in a high-stakes meeting, presenting a project she had poured her soul into for 3 straight months. Midway through, her boss abruptly cut her off. In front of the entire department, he said, "This is completely off target. Did you even bother to read the brief?" The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Aoi felt her face turn a burning crimson. Her hands began to shake violently. Her throat closed up. She couldn't speak. She couldn't think. She just stood there, completely frozen under their staring eyes. She practically fled the room, locked herself in a bathroom stall, and cried hysterically for 20 minutes. When she finally walked out, she made a definitive choice. She was done being this person. Done letting a single comment dictate her self-worth. Done being fragile. That night, she went down a research rabbit hole. How do you build mental toughness? How do you become unbreakable? That was the moment she crossed paths with the ancient samurai concept of Fudoshin, the principle of deliberate discomfort. The very first thing Aoi learned about Fudoshin completely contradicted everything modern society taught her about mental health. Modern psychology often preaches, avoid your triggers, create your safe spaces. Protect your peace. The samurai commanded the exact opposite. Seek discomfort. Expose yourself to what you fear. Train where it hurts the most. She read historical accounts of samurai meditating under freezing waterfalls. Sitting in cross-legged Zen meditation, also known as zazen, for agonizing hours until their legs went entirely numb and their minds screamed at them to move. They deliberately placed themselves in psychological crucibles to test their composure. Their philosophy was brutal but profoundly practical. You cannot forge armor without taking hits. You cannot develop emotional resilience by hiding from emotional challenges. Every time you run away from discomfort, you are actively training yourself to be weaker. Every time you face it, you are training yourself to be stronger. Aoi looked back and realized she had been doing the exact opposite for years. The moment something felt uncomfortable, she dodged it. A difficult conversation. She would send a cowardly email instead. An impending conflict, she would withdraw. A piece of criticism. She would immediately X-ray the person's flaws to defend herself. She had been systematically training yourself to be fragile without even realizing it. So, she resolved to do what the warriors did. She decided to actively hunt down the exact situations that shattered her composure. She started with something small, but to her, utterly terrifying. Every morning before heading to work, she would hit record on her phone and film a 60-second video of herself speaking. Then, she forced herself to sit down and watch it all the way through. To an outsider, this sounds trivial. To Aoi, it was psychological torture. She despised seeing herself on camera. She loathed the sound of her own voice. Every frame made her cringe, but she forced her eyes to stay glued to the screen. On day 1, she could barely get through the video without looking away in shame. By day 5, she began to objectively notice her nervous vocal tics. By day 10, she identified the exact moments she subconsciously avoided eye contact with the lens. And by day 20, something shifted. She could watch her own recording with complete detachment, free from that visceral, sickening discomfort. Her nervous system was rewiring itself. The emotional charge had evaporated. It wasn't that she suddenly fell in love with being on camera. It was that the discomfort no longer held any power over her. She had exposed herself to the fire so many times that the fire lost its heat. This is the bedrock of Fudoshin. Repeated exposure to discomfort strips away its power. What once triggered a panic attack gradually becomes neutral territory. By day 30, Aoi was ready to scale up the intensity. She discovered the ancient ritual of Misogi, a purification practice where samurai stood beneath ice-cold waterfalls. The physical act of freezing was merely a vehicle. The true objective was training the mind to maintain absolute composure under extreme physiological stress. Lacking access to a mountain waterfall, Aoi used her apartment shower. Every morning, after finishing her normal warm wash, she would crank the dial to the absolute coldest setting and force herself to stand under it for 3 minutes. The first attempt was an absolute nightmare. Her body went into immediate shock. Every biological instinct screamed at her to jump out of the stall. Her breathing became shallow, rapid, and panicked. Her brain went into full survival mode. She lasted a mere 15 seconds before tapping out. But she remembered the warrior's code. This is not about comfort. This is a simulation designed to keep your mind calm while your body is under attack. The next day she stepped back in, 20 seconds, then 30, then 45. By the second week, something extraordinary happened. Aoi stood beneath the icy deluge, and instead of hyperventilating, she focused entirely on her breath. It was slow, deep, and steady. Her skin was freezing, but her mind was a quiet room. She had successfully decoupled the physical sensation from her mental reaction. This is what the samurai termed kokoro, the unified mind-heart. The rare ability to experience intense discomfort in the body without generating suffering in the... They understood a truth that modern comfort has diluted. Physical hardship is the fastest highway to mental fortitude. While Aoi was mastering her internal triggers when she was alone, she hit a roadblock. The moment a real person blindsided her with a verbal attack or put her on the spot in public, her old programming would threaten to take over. To bridge this gap, she looked into the concept of kata, the form or pattern. In martial arts, samurai practiced specific movements thousands of times until the execution became a reflex. When an enemy struck, the warrior didn't pause to analyze the angle of the blade. The defense happened automatically because it had been hardwired into their muscle memory. As outlined in the script breakdown matching the strategic layout of *B2BE.PNG, Aoi realized she needed to design a set of emotional kata. These would be her pre-programmed, automatic responses to the 5 most common triggers that used to dismantle her peace of mind. Let's look at how she structured them. First, when flatly criticized, her automatic response was, "Thank you for the feedback. Let me digest that, and I will get back to you with a solution." Second, when personally attacked, she would calmly say, "I can see that you're upset. What specific operational changes do we need to make here?" Third, when rudely interrupted, her kata was to maintain total, unbroken silence. She would let them finish their thought, and then resume speaking exactly where she left off, without acknowledging the interruption at all. Fourth, when unfairly blamed, she would state the metrics clearly without an ounce of emotional defense, saying, "I see the situation differently. Here are the facts from my end." And fifth, when pressured to decide on the spot, she would protect her time by saying, "I need adequate time to review this properly to ensure we make the right move. I will have an answer for you by a specific time." These weren't just clever phrases, they were tactical shields. Every single day, Aoi rehearsed these kata out loud. She practiced them in front of the mirror, in her car during her morning commute, and while walking her dog. She would vividly imagine the worst-case social scenarios and practice executing her kata with flat, calm tone. At first she felt utterly ridiculous, a person role-playing arguments with an empty room. But then came the ultimate test in week 8. Her boss called her into his private office, threw a folder onto his desk and said, "The client absolutely hated the new creative direction. They said it looks amateurish, and they are actively looking to pull their multi-million-dollar contract." The old Aoi would have imploded on the spot. She would have stammered, offered desperate excuses, and felt her tears welling up. But before her conscious brain could even process the panic, her kata took the wheel. She looked him directly in the eye, her posture perfectly upright, her voice smooth and devoid of panic. "Thank you for letting me know immediately. What specific elements of the creative direction did they object to?" Her boss blinked, completely caught off guard. He had fully expected her to crumble, cry, or get defensive as she always did. Instead, he was looking at an immovable wall of professionalism. He cleared his throat, lowered his voice, and began talking through the details rationally. That is the raw power of Kata. When you pre-program your responses through relentless repetition, you don't have to think under pressure, you just execute. By day 90, Aoi had made undeniable strides. Yet, deep down, she knew something was still missing. She had gotten better at managing normal corporate stress, but she hadn't truly tested her armor under a catastrophic, high-stakes environment. She read about Shugyo, the samurai tradition of severe, brutal training. These were extreme crucibles designed to intentionally break a warrior so they could rebuild themselves from the ashes. Samurai would march through sub-zero blizzards without coats or fast for days on end. Aoi designed a modern psychological version of Shugyo, public speaking. She forced herself to sign up for a local storytelling event where everyday people share raw, personal stories in front of a live audience of 100 total strangers. No PowerPoint slides, no cue cards, just her, a spotlight and a microphone for 5 minutes. During her first week of preparation, she suffered a massive panic attack just visualizing the stage. Her heart raced, her palms turned into rivers of sweat, and every rational cell in her brain begged her to cancel. But the warrior's axiom held her in place. The path you most want to avoid is the exact path you are required to walk. She refused to back out, but she didn't prepare the way ordinary people do. Instead, she practiced like a samurai. She deliberately practiced failing. She would stand in her living room and intentionally train herself to mess up. She would practice suddenly forgetting her next line. She would practice standing in front of an imaginary crowd in dead, awkward silence for 10 seconds. She practiced every worst-case scenario over and over until the thought of failing no longer triggered a biological panic response. The night of the event arrived. The venue was packed. Aoi's name was called over the loudspeaker. She walked out onto the wooden stage. 100 white faces stared at her from the darkness. The stage lights blinded her eyes. She felt the massive spike of fear, the rushing adrenaline, the primal urge to drop the mic and run out the back door. Commentators call this the point of no return, but she simply acknowledged it and chose not to react to it. She began to speak. About 2 minutes into her story, it happened. Her mind went completely blank. A total, terrifying void. In the past, this exact moment would have utterly destroyed her. But she had stood in this specific mental valley 100 times in her living room. She didn't freeze, she didn't stammer. She simply stood in total silence for 3 seconds, let out a genuine, relaxed smile, said to the crowd, "Give me just 1 moment to catch my train of thought," and then transitioned smoothly back into her story. The audience didn't care at all. In fact, they leaned in closer. They connected with her more deeply because they saw a real human being up there, imperfect, but completely unbroken. When she finished, people approached her at the back of the room. "You were so incredibly calm up there," they said, "so effortlessly confident." They had absolutely no idea that she had been standing shoulder to shoulder with terror. But terror without reaction looks exactly like confidence from the outside. That is the lesson of Shugyo. You don't magically erase fear. You learn to perform flawlessly while fear is sitting right next to you. Following the massive success of her stage performance, Aoi made a critical blunder that almost cost her everything she had built. She relaxed. She felt like she had won the Grand War, so she quietly lowered her guard. She stopped turning the shower dial to cold. She stopped rehearsing her emotional kata. She stopped looking for small ways to step outside her comfort zone. For 2 weeks, she lazily coasted on her past victories. Then, on a random Tuesday evening, her boyfriend made a standard, mildly critical remark about dinner. Without warning, Aoi exploded in a flash of blinding anger. Just like that, the ugly habits of her past self returned. All the legendary composure she had built over months seemed to evaporate in a matter of seconds. Afterward, she sat on the edge of her bed, completely devastated. Had she lost everything? That was her introduction to Zanshin, the sustained awareness. The samurai state of uninterrupted focus that persists even after the battle is won. The old masters knew that far more warriors died after a victory than during the actual combat, because victory breeds complacency and complacency kills. Aoi realized she had treated mental toughness like a temporary fitness challenge with a finish line, rather than a permanent lifestyle to maintain. She drew a new line in the sand. This wasn't a 90-day self-help program. This was a lifetime practice. She established her non-negotiables, 3 rituals that would happen every single day, rain or shine, regardless of her mood. Morning, a mandatory 3-minute cold shower. Afternoon, film and critique a 60-second video of herself. And evening, rehearse her emotional kata for 5 minutes. No exceptions. By month 8, a fundamental shift occurred. Aoi wasn't just managing her stress better, she was morphing into a fundamentally different entity. People around the office began to look at her with a mix of awe and unease. "Nothing seems to rattle you anymore," her colleagues remarked. But a strange, unexpected friction began to develop in her social life. Her friends stopped inviting her to casual happy hours. Her co-workers stopped gossiping around her desk. Even her boyfriend grew defensive, stating, "You act like absolutely nothing can hurt you anymore." It's not normal. And he was right. It wasn't normal. Most human beings live in a state of perpetual emotional turbulence. When you step out of that matrix, you inadvertently become a mirror. People look at your calm and see their own chaotic fragility reflected back at them, and that makes them feel deeply threatened. At the same time, Aoi noticed a dangerous toxin creeping into her own mind: arrogance. She caught herself looking down on co-workers who panicked over tight deadlines. She had become judgmental. She found the antidote in the Zen concept of mushotoku, which means no gaining idea. The spiritual practice of acting without any attachment to an outcome, reward, or recognition. The samurai knew that the exact moment you become proud of your own mental strength, your ego creates a massive gaping hole in your armor. You are no longer training to be strong. You are training to feel superior. Aoi immediately stripped away her ego. She stopped tracking her streak days on an app. She stopped mentioning her cold showers to anyone. She turned her practice completely inward. She took cold showers not to prove she was tough, but simply because that was her morning ritual. She executed her kata not to win arguments, but because it was the correct way to behave. When you have no gaining idea, you have absolutely nothing to defend. You just are. And ironically, this made her twice as strong. 18 months into her journey, Aoi looked back at the woman who had wept in the bathroom stall and could barely recognize her. She had built genuine, thick mental armor. But she had also paid the full price for it, a price that most self-help gurus never mention. Loneliness. When you stop participating in the culture of complaining, you quickly realize how much human bonding is built entirely on shared misery. When you eliminate emotional drama from your life, you realize how many of your relationships were held together by mutual codependency. Aoi's old social circle naturally drifted away. Her family members started making passive-aggressive comments. "You've grown so cold, you're not any fun anymore." What they actually meant was, "You are no longer playing your assigned role. We can no longer rely on you to be fragile," which forces us to look at our own fragility. This is the hidden tax of building real, unshakable strength. The samurai understood this isolation perfectly. They lived on the literal and metaphorical fringes of regular civilian society. When you train your mind daily to stare down death without blinking, you can no longer relate to people who throw full-blown tantrums over a late coffee order. Aoi made peace with the quiet. She had undergone what the swordmasters called tan, the relentless forging process where steel is heated hammered, folded, and isolated until it is pure. 2.5 years after her journey began, Aoi was standing under her morning ice-cold shower. As the freezing water pelted her shoulders, she noticed something beautiful. She wasn't counting down the seconds in her head. She wasn't wishing for the time to pass. She was just there, completely present, totally relaxed. The freezing water was just freezing water. There was no internal dramatic narrative attached to it, no psychological resistance against it. This is the ultimate apex level of Fudoshin. It is not a state where nothing can bother you. It is a state where you are no longer bothered by being bothered. You allow yourself to feel the raw physical discomfort without translating it into mental suffering. You allow yourself to experience the initial spike of fear without letting fear dictate your next move. You face the chaos of the world without building an internal soap opera around it. This is what makes you entirely untouchable. Not the absence of life's storms, but the absolute collapse of your internal resistance to those storms. Life will never stop throwing chaos at your doorstep. The world will always provide crises, layoffs, heartbreak, and criticism. The only question that matters is whether those external winds have the power to rip you out by your roots, or whether you will remain standing like the mountain, weathered on the surface, but completely unmoved at the core. The question is never whether this ancient system works. The samurai proved its efficacy across centuries of blood and steel. The only question left is whether you are personally willing to step forward and pay the price. The price is a slice of discomfort every single day. The price is leaning directly into the things that scare you when every fiber of your being begs for comfort. The price is keeping the practice alive long after your initial motivation has burned out. But what you get in return is a life of absolute freedom. You get to walk through the fires of this world untouched. You get to become the anchor for everyone else when their worlds are spinning out of control. So, let's stop talking about mental toughness. Go turn your shower dial to cold. Go have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Go step onto the stage. Your armor isn't going to build itself in the shade of comfort. It is waiting to be forged in the fire of your deliberate hardships.